The first genuine peal of laughter hit Liam Langston at precisely 6:42 p.m. He noted the exact time because he was in the middle of reheating a spicy lentil stew and, in a clumsy moment, splattered some onto a kitchen cloth. Not just any cloth, the one with those whimsical, embroidered seahorse patterns Haven claimed ruined her minimalist aesthetic. As he scrubbed the cloth under the faucet, a sound reverberated from the living room. It wasn't the polite, slightly strained chuckle Haven offered when Liam delivered one of his famously terrible puns. Nor was it the practiced, saccharine laugh she used when placating her mother on the phone. This was raw, unrestrained, a joyful, snorting outburst that Liam hadn't heard in ages, a sound he once associated with spontaneous summer nights and shared bottles of vintage Merlot. Curiosity tugged him around the doorframe. There she was, curled on the plush velvet sofa, knees drawn up to her chin, her sleek raven hair falling over her shoulders. Her phone was angled away, but a stranger's face, a man's, flickered on the screen. Liam could distinctly hear him say, "Go on, do it again. Please. I'm absolutely in tears." Haven leaned forward, dramatically cleared her throat, and launched into an uncanny impression. It was Liam's voice. Word for word, she reenacted his morning's frantic search for a missing sock, mimicking his nervous habit of scratching the back of his neck and his characteristic mumble. She even feigned a trip on her way to the bathroom, an exact replay of his morning mishap. The man on the screen howled with delight, and Haven joined him, her laughter echoing through the silent house. Liam stood there, a smudge of stew on his comfortable sweater, the seahorse towel clutched in his hand, witnessing the woman he adored transform him into a living caricature for a complete stranger. He remained silent. That night, Haven padded into the kitchen, brushed a quick kiss against his cheek, and remarked, "God, I really needed that laugh today. You're such a creature of habit, babe." Liam managed a weak chuckle. What else was there to do? When the person you love slices a little too deep, you instinctively laugh it off, convincing yourself it's just their quirky sense of humor. But sleep wouldn't come. The laughter at 6:42 p.m. wasn't an isolated incident. It was the first tremor. And like all great storms, the sky didn't simply split. It fractured slowly, quietly, until one day, everything shattered beyond repair. The next morning, Liam plastered on a mask of normalcy. He'd become a master of pretense. He prepared Haven's coffee exactly as she liked it. Oat milk, perfectly steamed, 2 sugars, and placed it beside her phone, which vibrated incessantly with messages from that same man. He didn't look, didn't need to. Haven's laughter from the previous night was already burned into his thoughts. Still, he smiled, even apologizing for spilling stew on her cherished seahorse towel, as if that were the gravest offense committed. Later that afternoon, he found himself an unwilling audience to Haven's phone call with her friend, Anya Brennan. She was in the ensuite bathroom, the door ajar, curling her long hair, speakerphone blaring, her usual setup for multitasking and gossiping. Liam knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but when his name kept surfacing, it became impossible not to. "He did the sock routine again this morning," she giggled into the phone. "I swear he holds it up like it's a missing child. I just can't. He's too much sometimes." Anya's laughter joined hers. "You absolutely need a second season. That content is pure gold, right?" Haven replied, "Liam is literally a walking reality show. Endless content." A chilling realization clicked into place. His wife wasn't just mocking him to a friend. She was recording him, dissecting his quirks, turning them into clips. And not anonymously. Her latest digital series was prominently titled Modern Matrimony, The Unfiltered Reels. Liam hadn't bothered with season 2, dismissively told it was mostly girl talk, but it seemed he was the unwitting lead. When Haven stepped out to run errands, a newfound determination seized Liam. He opened her sleek laptop. What if everything he thought he knew about their shared life was a fabrication? There they were, folders brimming with clips labeled Shattered Mug Meltdown, The Missing Socks Chronicles, Volume 3, and Panic at 2 a.m., LOL. He clicked on that last one. She recounted how he'd fretted when she didn't return home until 2 a.m. He vividly remembered that night, his anxious pacing, his texts, his fear for her safety. She'd claimed her phone died. He'd met her at the door with a blanket and hot tea. Yet in her podcast, she'd recounted, he honestly looked like a lost golden retriever in a park. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Their laughter echoed, but Liam found no humor. The comment section beneath the clip was a brutal wasteland. He sounds utterly exhausting. How does she put up with him? That man desperately needs a reality check. Liam stared at the screen, blinking back a sudden sting, trying to steady his breath. When Haven returned, she strolled in humming, keys jingling onto the counter. She kissed the top of his head and asked if he wanted to finally watch that documentary he'd been so excited about. He nodded, voiceless, because he knew what would happen if he unveiled the truth. She'd dismiss it as a joke, accuse him of being too sensitive, insist it wasn't that serious. And perhaps she was right. Perhaps he was overly dramatic, the man who mourned a cracked mug and misplaced socks. But did that automatically condemn him to be public entertainment? He forced a smile, but deep within him, something soft, something worn and trusting, quietly began to pack its bags. Liam couldn't recall falling asleep that night, only waking abruptly in the dead of it. Haven lay beside him, her breathing even, her face turned towards the window. He lay motionless, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the countless strangers who had probably laughed at him that day. He'd always believed their marriage was a sanctuary, private, safe, intimate. Now it felt like a public service announcement on how to marry someone safe and still feel profoundly alone. The next morning, Liam performed his normalcy routine again. He cooked breakfast, forcing small talk about the weather, Haven's boss's impending promotion, anything to fill the void, to avoid any real conversation. Yet a tight tension gripped his ribs. His body already knew what his mouth refused to articulate. Haven's phone was a constant companion that morning. Notifications flashed, comments, shares, direct messages. It never stopped. Then she smiled, that same intimate grin she'd once reserved for their private jokes. But this one wasn't for him. It was for someone who messaged, "You're literally saving my mornings. Your husband is such a character." This changed my perspective on everything. Later that day, Liam retreated to the guest room, a space he hadn't entered in months, now largely a storage unit. He opened the closet door, staring at the empty suitcases. He didn't pack. He didn't even touch them. He simply needed to know they were still there. A silent promise that if he ever had to leave, he wouldn't have to do it with grocery bags. By the time Haven returned home, Liam had almost convinced himself he was overreacting. Perhaps it truly was harmless. Perhaps if he just laughed along, the ache would dull. So gently he asked her about her plans for the next episode, feigning genuine interest. Her eyes lit up. She launched into her new idea, a deep dive into the unique quirks of a certain type of husband. She called it the emotionally overfed man. Liam laughed. What else could he do? Then, without a flicker of hesitation, she said, "I'm going to use that voice you hate. You know, the one that sounds just like you when you're upset?" "Do people actually know it's me?" he asked, his voice strained. She shrugged dismissively. "I mean, not officially. But come on. Everyone assumes. That's precisely what makes it hilarious." Liam nodded, his heart hammering against his ears. He tried to speak, to form any coherent protest, but his mouth felt like it had forgotten its function. Instead, he left the room, sinking onto the stairs, staring blankly at the wall. That night, Haven posted a teaser video. Liam watched it silently from his phone in the bathroom, the screen illuminating his drawn face. The caption read, "This week, when your husband makes you feel like you're living in a melodramatic indie film." The clip showed her again, using that grating impression, saying, "I just don't know how to exist if you're not home by 7. I need closure on your ETA." A canned laughter track punctuated the dialogue, with dramatic zoom-ins on her feigned sad face. Over 42,000 views in just 2 hours. Comments flooded in like a wildfire. A conflagration Liam was utterly unprepared for. Yet he said nothing. Perhaps he was terrified of her reaction if he expressed his humiliation. Or perhaps, deep down, he already knew what she'd say. It wasn't merely the videos. That would have been a simpler pill to swallow. It was the insidious community they spawned. An audience, a running joke to which he was never invited. He began to notice subtle shifts in how people regarded him. Haven's colleagues, their regular barista, even their neighbors. One evening, as he wheeled their recycling bin to the curb, their next-door neighbor, Caleb Gray, smirked and quipped, "Don't forget to cry about it on your way back, Liam." Liam forced a brittle chuckle, but inside a silent scream tore through him. He hadn't even confessed his pain to Haven, yet strangers already knew the version of him she'd engineered, the dramatic, emotionally fragile husband incapable of functioning without her validation. He told himself he was being paranoid. He really did. But then he scrolled through the comments on her latest post and saw a username, Milo Decker, responding to everyone with an unsettling familiarity. Milo replied to at least a dozen comments, quoting Haven's podcast verbatim, adding his own commentary. "Oh, you should have seen the face he made when she said that. Priceless." Or, "He actually said that about the mug. Man's built different." It felt disturbingly personal. And then he saw it. Milo had commented, "She's far too sharp for him. Can't believe she's still entertaining this guy." Haven hadn't just liked it. She had replied, "Ha ha ha. You get it." Liam stared at the screen for an eternity. That was the precise moment something irrevocably fractured within him. He wasn't just a punchline anymore. He was a puppet in a macabre show she directed. Worse, she was entertaining someone else off stage while he continued his unwitting performance for the cheering crowd. He confronted her that night. His voice was quiet, steady, yet he felt the sharp edge beneath it. "Who is Milo?" he asked. At first, she feigned ignorance, then grew defensive, then annoyed. "Oh my God, Liam, it's just a fan. Why do you always detonate over absolutely nothing?" He told her he'd read their messages, that he'd seen the comment about her being too good for him, that he'd seen her like it. She rolled her eyes. "You're acting exactly like I describe you. This is why people relate. You're so fragile." That word, fragile. As if he were a cracked teacup no one dared touch for fear it would shatter. He wanted to scream that he had been the one to hold her together through every breakdown, every dreadful job, every long night she cried over her mother's disapproval. But instead he posed the quiet question that had festered within him for weeks. "Do you even respect me anymore?" She offered no immediate answer. After a long, agonizing silence, she finally said, "I respect you for who you are. I just wish who you are didn't make me feel so stuck." Liam didn't respond. He simply nodded, walked into the guest room, and locked the door. It was the first night he hadn't slept beside her, and strangely, he slept better than he had in months. But what he didn't know then was that Milo Decker, the man in the comments, wasn't merely a fan. He possessed knowledge he shouldn't have, private jokes that never aired, intimate moments that were never uploaded. Liam was about to uncover the shocking truth. The next day, she carried on as if nothing had transpired. She brought him coffee, suggested they visit the farmer's market as they once did, even wore the scarf he'd bought her on a random Tuesday because she'd once said it made her feel unexpectedly loved. For a fleeting moment, Liam dared to hope they might be okay, that last night was the wake-up call, that she might finally choose them over them. Then her phone buzzed. She was in the shower, and Liam honestly had no intention of checking. But when Milo Decker's name illuminated her screen, something inside him snapped. Not out of anger, not even jealousy, but out of sheer survival. He'd already lost fragments of himself in this marriage, and if he didn't uncover the truth soon, he knew he'd lose the rest. Act now or regret it later. He opened her laptop, the very one he used to help her edit her episodes before he became the main character she relentlessly roasted. She'd once asked him to install editing software, and he vividly recalled the password. August 11th, her late brother's birthday. He felt a pang of guilt using it, but not enough to stop. He didn't need to dig far. Her iMessage conversations with Milo were synced to the laptop, and what he saw made his stomach churn so violently he had to stand and brace himself against the desk. They'd been communicating for months. It wasn't just flirty messages. It was raw emotional intimacy. Voice notes, personal photos, screenshots of his texts to her, texts he'd believed were private, texts he'd sent when he worried she was distant, when he desperately tried to reconnect. She had forwarded them to Milo with captions like, "He's in one of his clingy moods again," followed by crying, laughing emojis. But it got worse. There were videos, not the podcast clips, but personal ones. Videos of Liam folding her laundry, cooking dinner, and humming softly, even attempting to dance behind her as she filmed herself lip-syncing. A moment he'd thought was playful, spontaneous. It turned out she'd sent it to Milo with the caption, "My little disaster." And Milo's responses were sickening. "You're carrying that man." And then, "Bet he still doesn't know we've met." That last one hit him like a speeding train. "We've met." Liam scrolled frantically, desperate for context, and then he saw it. A photo angled from the corner of their living room. There he was, on the sofa in his sweats, engrossed in a documentary. And there, blurred in the background, sat Milo Decker at their dining table, a beer in hand. He had been in Liam's house. What I'm about to show is banned in 12 countries. Liam didn't remember sitting down. He didn't remember how long he stared at that photograph. He only registered the sound of the shower cutting off and his heart slamming against his ribs, desperate to escape. When Haven emerged, wrapped in her towel, humming a cheerful tune, Liam was already holding the laptop. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She froze mid-step, her eyes locking onto the screen. And in that charged moment, something shifted. Not just in her expression, but in the very air, as if the performance was abruptly over and the house lights had snapped on. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered, her voice devoid of amusement for the first time in months. She sounded genuinely scared. Liam nodded once. And that's when a terrifying realization dawned. She hadn't just been mocking him to strangers. She'd been mocking him, to the man who had sat at their dining table, who had looked him in the eye and said, "Thanks for the hospitality, man." Liam stood up and walked out of the room. She didn't follow. She didn't utter his name. She simply stood there, water still dripping from her hair, as everything they had built quietly disintegrated around her. And he hadn't even told her what he planned to do next. Liam didn't leave the house that night. He didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't even demand an explanation. He simply sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the floor, wondering how many intimate details of his life had been shared, twisted and laughed at by people who didn't even know his last name. He heard her pacing outside the door. Once or twice she paused, as if to knock, but she never did. He suspected she knew an apology wouldn't land anymore. Not after that. The next morning, Liam rose before her. He made coffee, as always, even poured her a cup. He wasn't being kind. He was maintaining stillness. He needed silence. He needed her to believe he was still paralyzed, still processing, still too weak to act. And perhaps a part of him was, but another part, a very new part, was finally awakening. He began making copies, screenshots, audio files, text logs. Everything he'd unearthed on that laptop, he meticulously backed up to a flash drive, which he then tucked into his sock drawer. He wasn't yet certain of his next move. But one thing was clear. He would not allow her to control this narrative again. Not to Milo, not to her fans, not to anyone. She had reduced him to a caricature, a soft joke wrapped in sad punchlines. He was done playing the fool. That day she actively avoided him, spending most of it cloistered in her office, door closed, likely scrambling to delete evidence or gauge the extent of his knowledge. Around 5:01 p.m., she finally approached him. Her tone was soft, rehearsed, the kind of performance that had once disarmed him. Not anymore. "Liam, can we talk, please?" she asked. He looked up from his phone, nodding slowly. "Sure. You want to talk now?" She sat across from him, legs folded, fingers knotted. "I don't even know where to start." "How about with him?" Liam replied, his voice calm yet firm. "Start with Milo. Tell me what he was doing in our house." She blinked, then averted her gaze. "It was just once." "Lying's a bad opening move," Liam said, his composure unsettling her. "Try again." Her face contorted, sadness quickly giving way to frustration. Fine. It wasn't just once, but nothing physical happened. We just talked, laughed. It was emotional. I know it was wrong, but I felt powerful. Liam cut in, watching her flinch. You felt powerful because I trusted you. And you sold that trust for laughs and comments and a fake connection from someone who only liked you because he got to watch you tear me down. Liam, it wasn't like that. Then what was it? He snapped, louder than intended. What exactly was it, Haven? Because I've been sitting here trying to understand how we went from dancing in the kitchen to you secretly recording me and feeding it to your little internet boyfriend like I'm some circus act. She remained silent, so Liam stood. You made me believe we were a team, but you weren't playing for the same side, and now you're panicking because the story doesn't belong to you anymore. She asked what he meant. Liam offered no answer. Instead, he walked out of the house for the first time in 2 days. He needed air, needed space, but more importantly, he needed her to understand that his silence was no longer a sign of weakness. He had just emailed himself a copy of everything, and the next move would be his. The house fell into a silence deeper than Liam had ever known. Not the usual comforting quiet that settles after a long day, but a profound stillness that followed something irrevocably shattered, with both parties too afraid to tread on the pieces. He stayed away for most of the day, wandering aimlessly. He lingered in a bookstore for hours, pretending to read. At one point, he found himself captivated by a children's puppet show through a store window, and all he could think was, at least the puppets knew they were being watched. When he returned that evening, Haven was in the kitchen. No music, no phone in hand, no performance, just her, quietly chopping vegetables as they used to do before her life became a highlight reel. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his, perhaps hoping he'd softened. He hadn't. He walked past her without a word and went straight to his laptop. That's when he uploaded the files. No, not to the internet. He wasn't like her. He didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. He sent everything to a friend who worked in media compliance, someone who understood intellectual property and the ramifications of broadcasting private content without consent. Liam clarified he wasn't seeking a lawsuit. He simply wanted clarity. What she did wasn't just cruel. It was potentially illegal, and he needed someone else to articulate it aloud. His friend called him back an hour later, his voice tight, serious. Liam, he said, she crossed multiple lines. You never gave consent for your voice or image to be used in monetized content, let alone for your private moments to be mocked. Depending on the revenue she generated and any sponsors involved, this could get very messy, very fast. For her, it brought Liam no joy. If anything, the knot in his stomach tightened further. But it also allowed something in his chest to breathe for the first time in months. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't oversensitive. He was a man who had been publicly humiliated for likes, and now someone else saw it too. That night, Liam left the flash drive on the kitchen counter. No note, no message, just the tangible weight of everything she thought she could conceal behind a laugh track. He went to bed without speaking. Around midnight, he heard her enter the room. She didn't get into bed. She stood near the door holding the flash drive. He could hear her breathing, shallow, uneven. What are you going to do with this? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam didn't even look at her. Depends on what kind of story you want to tell next. One where you take accountability, or one where you double down. She offered no reply. 2 days later, she canceled her next episode, posting a vague update on her social media about needing a mental health break. Her followers inundated her comments with support. Take all the time you need, Queen. Protect your peace. Men don't deserve your energy anyway. She never corrected them. She never once said, actually, I betrayed someone who trusted me, and now I don't know how to face it. So Liam made a decision. If she wouldn't speak the truth, he would. Not for sympathy, not for revenge, just to reclaim his life from the screen she had stolen it for. 3 weeks after everything unraveled, Liam recorded his own version of the truth. Not for a podcast, not for likes. He didn't even show his face on camera. He simply sat down in the guest room, where he'd been sleeping ever since, and spoke into an old microphone she used to own. The one he'd bought her when she first dreamt of building something real. He told the story from his perspective, from the man behind the curtain, The one who cried off camera, who folded the laundry while the world laughed, who believed that love meant allowing yourself to be seen, not edited. He didn't name her. He didn't humiliate her. He didn't retaliate. He simply spoke his truth, and it felt like breathing pure air for the first time after living underwater. This changed my life in 30 days. A week later, he moved out quietly. No final showdown, no dramatic confrontation. He left her a letter, neither bitter nor vengeful, just honest. He told her he hoped one day she'd understand the crucial difference between being adored and being applauded. That what she'd built was never truly real, because it was never truly vulnerable. That the jokes were never harmless if they were constructed on someone else's humiliation. Surprisingly, she never posted about their separation. No cryptic quotes, no dramatic announcements. Liam suspected she finally understood that the narrative no longer belonged to her to spin. He rented a small apartment downtown. It's nothing fancy, just shelves, space, and a profound sense of peace. No cameras, no microphones. He started writing again. Not for content, not for exposure, but purely for himself. He even joined a local storytelling group where people sat in a circle, sharing moments that had changed them. Not for an audience, but for each other. A month ago, someone asked if he'd ever trust again. Liam told them yes, because the problem was never love. It was performance mistaken for genuine connection. And now he knew the difference. He wasn't the punchline anymore. He was the narrator, and he chose what got remembered. Have you ever felt like your private life became someone else's public story? How did you take back your voice?